So we're gonna go over the next chapter. Go ahead and download your notes and your assignments. Okay, I'll go ahead and get started. So this week we are gonna talk about how we can better secure the networks. As many of you are gonna be specialists, analysts, incident responder, etc. Right? So we have to be familiarized with the terminology, especially the acronyms and the appliances. So we'll go over the appliances and where they should sit. I think last week we touched a little bit on protocols and network technologies. This week we're going to expand on the network, but focusing more on security appliance. So when you hear the term HIDS, that's a host-based intrusion detection system. So when we say host-based, it's installed on the system or it is the system itself, right? Sometimes you would have an appliance that would be a box that you would plug into the network. Sometimes it would be a software. So host-based tend to be application. So this is going to be a software that you use. So at home, when you're using a security software, like I use Avera, and sometimes you have an all-around security software, likely that it has a detection system. So that is a host-based. Now, the difference between that and the network-based is the network is network-centric. So the host-based is still able to detect anomalies like your malware, and it's giving you some detection protection. So it is an alarm system. It only sounds off whenever that it sees some kind of anomaly or things that could be malicious, right? Threats, and in the case of attack, it would sound off. Now, the network-based intrusion detection system, it's not able to detect anomaly on the individual system. So that means that when you have a host base, it would be usable for your desktop environment, like your computer that you're sitting at, where the network base is focused on the entire network. So it won't be able to detect anything that would impact the individual system or the workstation or your laptop, but it will be able to sound off whenever that there's attack or things that are entering the network. So with that, we would go to the question. So for the first question, hello, it asks you, what is the difference between your intrusion detection system and your intrusion prevention system? So IDS stands for intrusion detection system, and IPS stands for intrusion prevention system. So the detection system, as we looked at the host base and the network, they are alarm system. It sounds off whenever it detects a certain type of traffic in the network sense, right? Like if I'm getting denial of service attack, you're gonna get a flood of traffic coming through. It's irregular, it's abnormal compared to our traffic trend on a daily basis. It's different. Where the host base, it might be a malware that was downloaded on that individual system. It will detect it and it will sound off. It will give you some kind of notification. So the prevention system would block it, right? Where if I place the prevention system at the corridor of my network, it would block a certain type of traffic, right? That could be harmful to the network environment. Whereas the detection system, it will not be able to block it. It would only notify you or sound off the alarm when it detects it. So in the overall, if you look at this, the preventative measure, you need to use IPS, right? And when you are in a reactive environment, you would use an IDS. So normally they would have the IDS and the IPS. So the IDS, the intrusion detection system, does not prevent attack, right? It only sounds off the alarm. It's kind of like having a fire alarm system in your home or in your building. The fire still takes place, but it would sound off the alarm. So the IDS does that. The IPS is having a fire extinguisher, right? Or things that would prevent your building from catching fire, right? Like maybe spray retardant to the wall, using a certain type of paint that would not catch fire, or materials for your building that. So the intrusion prevention system would prevent threats from coming in or impacting that system, whereas the intrusion detection system, it only sounds off the alarm. It only notifies you, it cannot prevent. Okay. Now, so how does it know what to prevent, right? Usually we set up a set of rules. So out of the box, it would have signature and behavior of things that could be harmful. And then you would update it with specific rules that would apply to your organization. It's like how your family would have a set of rules, right? Like when you were growing up, they would tell you don't talk to strangers because that will prevent you from maybe, you know, getting hurt by someone else, things like that. So you have to really let the system understand what would work for your environment and your business. So with that, no system is a perfect system. So what you would see is you would have system that would have positive or negative outcome. But I want to go over this diagram real quick. So the internet is anything that's above our network when we leave our local area network, right? So in RCCD, if you're looking at the entire district, you have Norfolk College, Moreno Valley College, and Riverside City College, and encompasses all the systems that are connecting staff offices, student labs, etc., would build the network. Now, when we leave our CCD network, when we go into service provider, that's considered the wide area network or the internet. So in my opinion, and you can ask anybody in security, they would tell you that there's no perfect network design, right? There's always a flaw in some kind of design. It doesn't matter how many appliances or how many things that you place. There would be a way to get in. So in this particular diagram, network topology, it shows you that they put sensors and collectors. So those are just appliances that are listening, that's detecting and monitoring their entire network. So you can do that. But ultimately, they do have a firewall. So coming in from the internet, this firewall is gonna block and filter. Think of it like a screen door to your house, right? To your front door. So before you can get to your front door, you would have to go through the screen door. So it screens out all the traffic based on the rules here. Then we're gonna get into some areas. So on this side of the network, you would see that they had placed a network intrusion detection system that's console-based here to really detect. So once they pass through the firewall, right, if it's a threat, it's gonna sound off. And then when it gets to some of the more segment of the network, and then they would manage the ports specifically. And this is only a section of the diagram, right? So this is what you would see that's controlling the external traffic or external threat coming in, and then having an alarm system. Is this the best? If this is doing its job, you might have maybe a smaller percentage that's going to get caught here. Okay. So if I'm an attacker, yes, question. Connectors, software or hardware? They are usually appliance. Yeah. You can set up server system to do that. You don't have to buy an actual system, but you can buy actual system that would do its job. And then you can also use like system with additional software to do that. Good question. So what they do is they would collect the information and then it would report, right, to specific system. So this is, they're interested in looking at, but a lot of the security appliance, it does that already. So if I'm the attacker, what's my main target, right? The only blockage between me and the rest of the network, it looks like is the border firewall right there, right? That's what I'm gonna go for. So if I cripple this or surpass this, I can get through here, and then I just gotta make sure that I tackle this, right? So how can I know what's talking? You run Wireshark. You guys seen that before? It would list all the appliance. So I just need to find a way to connect. And then I run Wireshark to see which appliances are talking. And once I have that information, I would then be able to focus on how I can cripple these. Because if once I'm inside, this might sound off and it would notify the other systems. So I want to be able to do what? Two things. Pretty simple, right? Masking my identity, which is going to be my IP address and my MAC address, right? So if I was to update the security layout, I would use a little bit more security features on this, right? Because these twos are just not enough. And we're only looking at one section of the design. Let's go to the next one. So this, you can see a more of like an infrastructure. So when we say infrastructure, it would integrate, right? Like from the outside coming in with all the additional area. So you have the web server, which most companies have, they host website. And then with that, you might have some kind of like online registration with, customer or user database. So you would have that here. And this would be considered the DMZ right here. Okay, because it is facing the web. All the traffic is going to come in here, right? Through the router. It's going to get routed to the particular area. So the website is going to be hosted here. I have a database server. And then this particular organization, they put in a network intrusion detection system. In my opinion, and a firewall right here. So whenever that you see a diagram like this, the private network is here and it's screened by two firewall, you know that on the other side is your DMZ, the demilitarized zone, right? It is web facing or internet facing. Now, so the firewall's job is, again, like things are coming in from the internet, it's gonna screen, and then if it's, like we go to youtube.com, it's gonna take it to the web server, and then it's gonna associate the account, right? The videos, all the individual account with the database here. Now, YouTube would have a media server, and they would pull that, and that's also housed. Now, the critical back-end server, they connect some of this on to the other side, but in my opinion, I would put on another appliance here, because if I'm the attacker, guess what happens? I'm going to come in from here, right? Externally, past this firewall, go mask here, and then I can eventually get over here. So my goal is, my target is these guys right here, okay? But I have to overcome two areas. Now, more of the private network, you see that this is the private network where they put more intrusion detection system here. So once you're inside, so commonly you would see the NDS on the inside like this as alarm system. And you would see a couple firewall like this. Now, putting too many firewalls in the network, it's going to boggle down your network, right? Because it has to screen. Just think about like if you put a filter and more filter and more filter and you're trying to pour water or fluid through, sometimes it's usually going to get slower and slower and slower. And so you're going to have congestion somewhere depending on the placement of that, right? So that's why we run into issues where we don't always have the best perfect design. Okay. Any question? Sure. No permission. It's automatically. Yeah, so yeah, that particular sniffer is undetected. So it is a passive sniffer. But if you run Nmap, it becomes active sniffer. So at home, all you have to do is connect to the wireless network. And so that's why wireless is such a vulnerable area, because most company has a public wireless, or if they allow bring your own device to work. I just need to be able to spoof the IP of that device that the user is using, like a smartphone, connect to that wireless network, and I can scan. Normally, they would segregate the wireless network from, so for example, right? Like if I add a wireless network here, I would probably attach it to another NIDS, that NIDS on the bottom there, add a switch and then connect that NIDS to that switch, and then also this to another part of the network. So I would segment that out, and then I would use IP address to make sure that it's on completely segregated network. And then the switch that I'm going to be using from that part of the network has to be a layer 3 and up, or layer 4 switch, so that way it also routes. Okay. So that's why you see a lot of the wireless network is, you know, when you connect to RCCD, a lot of the RCCD guests, right, they segregate it that way. So we do it physically and logically. Okay. So I would also put, instead of an NIDS, you can use an IPS there to prevent, because that's going to be like another filter coming in from the wireless side. Okay. And then some company, they would put the public wireless here and then the private wireless on the inside. You see a lot of that at the hospital. But yeah, running Wireshark can scan. So I just need to attach it to the network. Okay. So with that, you're going to have system that's going to raise alarm even when there's nothing, right? So the overly sensitive system, right? That's, you know, the sky is falling, right? So the false positive is alert an event when it's non-threatening. So potentially it might, the threat level might not be high, or it's not even a threat level, then it still raises an alarm. So false positive. For the false negative, it doesn't detect it even when the threat appears, right? So you want a system that has a balance, but operating more on a more cautious area, false positive is better than false negative. Okay. So all appliances, all software, even security software, they will tell you the percentage, right, rate for the false positive and then the false negative. So before you invest in a certain type of appliance, you want to look at the percentage, because, you know, they do analysis on it before it actually hits the market. So, and then you can always ask the vendor and they can give you the information. Any question? Okay, so IDS information is there. We want to use it to detect attacks so we can prevent it, right? And it uses signature-based detection. So basically, those are definition very, very similar to your antivirus type of definition, right? It would list a specific identity of the particular threat. Could be protocol-based or traffic-based, or sometimes it could, if it's a malware, it is a definition, basically the code type definition of the malware. Or if it's heuristic, it is behavior detection. So for example, like if you have denial of service attack, you know that it would be like a chunk of packets coming through, maybe more than 50 packets that's coming through, or it would be a certain type of traffic pattern, right? you would see with certain type of attack, like man in the middle, sessions type of hijack. So they have specific behavior that's already entailed with the appliance or the software. And then, but the important part is that you have to really look at the logs and establish the trends, because your traffic is going to be different than the next company traffic, even though you are operating in the same type of industry. So the behavior and the pattern can also change based on your need in operation. Okay. So it would be something like this with the accuracy. So we want, you know, is it truly positive or truly negative, right? So as a specialist, you have to work directly with the system, and it will tell you, right, notification, alarm is going to go off. So you want to look at those notifications and go and check it, right? Look at the logs. Look at, you know, all the capture of your network traffic. Okay, so IPS information. So here's another one. This is more of an infrastructure. So you have certificate authentication server. So you know that when you see this, you know that they're going to do like web authentication, right? Like logging in to pay your bill, logging in to make a purchase, e-commerce. And then you have a web server. So these two usually go together. And then you have the mail server for messaging. So internet LAN, this is for the internal. They have their own database server on the inside. So this particular diagram shows that here's the external traffic coming in, public IP, right? And entering the local area network. They have a network intrusion prevention system. The first one is located on the firewall. So technically, you don't really lay things out like that, right? The way that we look at it, it's still on the rack, but logically you would attach, right? The router is on the outside routing everything in, and then when it hits your main switch, you would have a network intrusion prevention system connecting and a firewall connecting onto that switch. Okay, that's the switch. And then coming in, so here's their DMZ area, right? And that's segregated. That's a separate network. We also can control that with, you know, virtual LAN and IP. And then coming in on the attaching, bridging that to another firewall that's going to be controlling this area. So this company has 3 firewalls. They have an internal firewall, right? This is going to be more between the DMZ and their private network. They have another middle firewall and then a border firewall. And then here they have a prevention system. So comparing this one to the last one, you can see that this particular design does have a little bit more security that it's going to block on both sides. The concern, right, we have to see the performance in the network on how the throughput would be. I would load balance like crazy to make sure that, you know, your priority traffic goes through and not being filtered too much. Okay. So that's how you can see. So at the end, right, we want to be able to design or redesign a network that has security. Okay. So in this next part, it talks about SSL and TLS. So as this is web oriented, right, for authentication and encryption with the web, you wanted to make sure that it can be fast in responding. So we can use a hardware device that's going to manage that type of traffic. And it also allows us to manage encryption keys. Okay. And then this is often the network intrusion prevention system is the decryptor, because once it needs to decrypt it to check to see if it's okay or not, right? Because when it's encrypted, it's not able to see that, okay? So when it hits the intrusion prevention system, it has to unlock it to kind of see, oh, what's the content? Is it okay? Can I pass it? If it's not, then it's going to block it right there, right? So this is going to be a little bit slower in the performance if in the case, right? To the user, not so much, but if you have huge amount of traffic, if you have an enterprise, right, you want to make sure that you monitor this. Okay. Then we also have software-defined network. This is often come with a lot of the appliances, so you can virtualize, right? You guys seen guest type of operating system, but you can do that with the switches and the router. So I can set up a VLAN, virtual local area network, right? Is it really physically a different segment of my network? No, it's through a port, and then through that port, I would connect another switch and control that, right? So it's kind of like branching it out, but I can filter everything and use a different set of IP address to really control that. For example, student versus staff at RCCD, right? They can segregate that by putting, you know, student at MVC on one VLAN, student on Norco on another VLAN, and so on. And this lab that you're actually sitting on is on a virtual local area network. So that way your traffic is not impacting the rest of the network. And that was my request to them, is that I want my students to have more freedom in scanning and doing things. Even they can still see, you guys can still see the entire network, but in that sense, right, you are controlled through the local area network, virtual ports. So you can logically set that up. And you can also port forward or you can block. Okay. So coming back to the question now, we can say that when should you use the SSL TLS accelerator? Whenever that you have TLS type of traffic that's implemented. So TLS is often used for HTTPS, secure websites, right? We use it to allow the user to authenticate, and we can protect their data once they authenticate. So nowadays, HTTPS is the predominant type of protocol that we would use for the web. So hence, we would use TLS. We hardly use SSL anymore, right? Integrating TLS is the primary. Now, some company, they would also put a honeypot to lure the attacker. The point in it is to really study the pattern or the type of attack that they're facing. Especially for newer companies, they don't have historical data to build on to kind of understand potential attacks, right? Now, honeypot, you have to be careful in where you protect it, where you protect your network and where you place it. Because if you can lure attacker in, right, if you don't fully protect your network, potentially, you know, they can come in from the honeypot. So how can they do that, right? They can do it through tools. There are tools, including in Kali Linux. I think my CIS41A this week, they're gonna work on honeypot with Zap. So you can enable that feature to allow that system to become a honeypot. So basically, not just to open the system, but make that system appealing to attacks, right? Kind of like dress it up and you know, sometimes they can also place fake data on the system to kind of invite or make it, appealing to the attacker that's scanning it. So you can turn, with the software, we can enable a lot of the ports that they normally look for. And then we would place fake data on there just to lure them. So with that, you can do a few things, right? The sensor and the monitoring system would be able to detect the type of traffic that's coming through. And then in the case of it's web, you wanted to see, right, what kind of things are they using to, decrypt your data, and so on, okay? So it's a way that we can lure the attacker or divert them to a certain part of the network. So when you're looking at attack map online, you're gonna see a bunch of attacks coming through in graphical user interface, right? You would see a lot of things from Northern California. I know Microsoft and a lot of the tech companies, they do security analysis. So sometimes they would set up systems like that to be able to lure and look at the pattern, right? Is the attack coming from China or other part of the world? So we would see, and all of that we can see in protocol. So you can go to Viking, you can go to a lot of these security company, and you can find attack maps. So honey file is basically a type of file that would lure or become it. They are very attractive to the attacker. Like I mentioned before, we would put fake files on there. So those files are honey file, right? We would use, so, you know, like more than 50–60% of attacking is about psychology, right? And if you want to be a good ethical hacker, you need to think about the aspect of how human interacts outside of like social engineering and all that aspect, right? We build systems to really mimic us, the things that we do, right? The tasks that we need to complete. So a lot of times we have to think about like the perspective of the attacker. What are they thinking of? What are they really targeting? What are they looking for? How can we attract them to a certain area if we put up a honeypot, right? So the file name coming down to the file type, right? They might look for design for a certain company like Boeing. A lot of the times, right, the easiest thing to push in the dark web is your CSV file of accounts, right? Passwords, user accounts, ID, employee benefits, that kind of stuff. Any question? Okay, so honeypots information is here. Make sure we go over it. And then if you have a group of honeypots, that's called honey nets. And we want to separate that, okay, and control it. You can also use virtual network, but now you know that they can do virtual escape. So they can go from virtual machine to it, virtual LAN to it. So if it's attached to your network, likely it's all about timing and resource, right? Okay, honey file information is here. So for the analysis, right, most of you will become analysts in security after you become specialists. And some of you might just stick with IT and do more IT management. But all of those positions is going to require some kind of analytic information. So when you use telemetry, all that is we would use a centralized system like we mentioned earlier. So all those sensors need to collect data and it needs to send it back for processing, right? And some of this can also relate it to your utility. All the things that we use, gas, electric, you know, water, those type of system or the SCADA system, they have telemetry to actually determine, right, what's the performance, what's the normal usage, and so on. So when they use fake telemetry, all that is just to send out fake data to the monitoring system to disrupt that system, right? So they would interrupt that system by just adding fake data. Okay, so this is another form of attack now, right? So how can the attacker cause the system disruption by telemetry? It's to use fake or inaccurate data. So they can send corrupted data to the system to cause the disruption. So let's say that the system is set up to have shut down or shut off because it's safety, right? For example, if I'm looking at utility company, there might be certain type of data that the system would get, and it's gonna raise some kind of notification or alarm, and it's going to go into safety mode, right? So they can generate that kind of data, send it to the target system, and that target system would absorb or take the data and interpret the data and then go into safety mode. So you would see things like that, right? So how can we protect against that? We have to now be able to filter all of that out. Is how can we distinguish between real and fake data, right? If we don't have behavior pattern on for our system, we have to set up rules to really determine the data integrity, right? Checking for hash of the data, the source of the data, where that's coming from, the type of data. And so all of these things is being verified by the security system. Any question? Okay, so the next part, we're gonna go over IEEE a little bit and then going into wireless. You're gonna work on your wireless router today. I think some of you had me 425 last semester. You've seen wireless router looking at the configuration for your Wi-Fi. And then when you take the networking class, it's gonna be revisited. Some school, they spend the whole entire class on wireless, right? Many times that you would see classes gonna have repetition of wireless from the networking area to the security area. So 802.11 from IEEE, this is going to be focused on your wireless. And it is port-based authentication protocol. We can use this for your physical or wireless. So let's go through, right? We can set up where it would do filter. So an access point is going to be the centralized or an appliance. It could be a role that the device is going to be connecting to. Access point has routing capability. All wireless routers are access point, but not all access point are wireless router. So in an organization that is large, if you visit, you know, any of the college campus or university campus, you're going to see a lot of access points, right? If you visit a very large company, they have multiple campuses or building across. Like if you go to Cisco in San Jose, right, they have like 10 buildings on one block, and then you go down more, right, you would see. So they would have a lot of access point for their employees and visitors, right? But all wireless routers are access points. So your wireless router at home is an access point. But when you look at the access point around the campus, they are not wireless routers, okay? And they are specific. So when you look at the routers, they are access point, but it's not the other way around, okay? And on the outdoor access point, you would see that if you drive around the city, if you look up near the lights, some of them have like the solar panel attached to them. Those are industrial access point. And you would see them like they would stand, it looks like a light pole, but it would have access points. So you would have public wireless access point for the city, right? For the metro, for the main area, okay? And then they have the fat and the thin access point. So the fat access point, those are standalone and they are autonomous. You see that a lot across cities. And it would allow you to connect to the clients. The thin access point, this is control-based access point. It's not standalone and it's managed by the controller. So on a college campus like this, they would install thin AP and there would be a controller that manages all of those, right? Across some region, they would install fat AP. Those are autonomous. And so those don't need to control, and they act almost like a router themselves, okay? So autonomous systems don't need to be controlled. Okay, so there are two primary bands that you currently see right now for North America and across the world, 2.4 gigahertz and 5G, okay? The higher the frequency, what did we learn in our last class or current class? The higher the frequency, the shorter the distance. So everybody wants to be on 5G. You have to know that to support 5G, you have to have more what? Access point. Isn't that true? Because the distance is not longer. All your smart devices and your wireless devices, they all support 2.4. On the lower end devices, like you would see for the household products, right? They usually come with 2.4 gigahertz by default, okay? Not all of them have 5G, right? If they have dual band, they would have both. But sometimes when you lose signal in 5G, your best bet is going to be 2.4. Remember, the lower the frequency, the longer the distance. So your system is able to see that wave coming through a lot longer in range versus something that is 5G, which is higher in frequencies, so it needs to be shorter. So how can we expand 5G is to have a relay, right? So a lot of the access point acts as just a relay. Take that signal, right, and sends it back to the central location. Relay 1, relay 2, right, send it back to the central system, and that system sends out to the router, okay? So keep in mind that. And then your channel width is going to be 20 to 40. Combined, it's usually 20 megahertz, okay? So AC right now is what we accepted for use. And your 5G band is 20, 40, 80, and 160 megahertz. So you actually have more channel width with the 5G compared to the 2.4, okay, traditionally. And these are all the classes or the standards of the class. There are others, right? We're just using AC because, you know, AC is, we're able to adapt more than just width and frequency. There's encryption technology that's involved too, okay? But about a few years from now, you might see a different one being used, right? Technology is always changing based on the need. So, okay. So we talked about all wireless routers are access point, but not all access point are wireless routers. So you have to look at the description and the specification of the device. Your wireless router standardized 802.11ac have these bands, 20, 40, 80, and 160. You just double. So you take a 20, you multiply it by 2, you get 40 megahertz. You take 40, you multiply it by 2. It's double each of the bands. You get 80 megahertz. You take 80, multiply it by 2, you get 160 megahertz for the standardized AC bands. And because for the width, so you have dual bands, right? 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz. So when we see hertz, that's just frequency, right? Because all of these are electronic devices, and then for wireless, it's really depending on how we want the information. So a lot of the access point is operating at 2.4 gigahertz, right? So if you go into like metro area, like you go downtown this near Civic Center, a lot of the times they would put wireless access point there, and you would see that they are 2.4 gigahertz. So that way they can control the channel width, and they would use specific. And then if it's newer technology, you would see options with 2.4 and 5G. 2.4 is used in distance, right? So if you go from like one block to the next block, you're not going to lose that signal, but you're still going to have multiple access points being used. Okay, so when you're using wireless, a lot of times it depends on the antenna. And the placement of antenna is important, okay? So let me come back to that real quick. So these are the channel that you would see, right? So you have channel 1, channel 6, channel 11. And then 3 and 11. They're overlapping channels. Okay, so it uses SSID, right? SSID stands for Service Identifier. It's a way that the system, the access point or the router would identify itself to the rest, okay? So when you go home, you would connect to your access point using a certain name, right? Or your wireless router at home using a certain SSID. Now, what we can do is for a private wireless network, we need to not beacon SSID. Because if you don't want people to connect, right, you disable that option so that way they don't connect. Okay. You can also have system connecting by a certain type of, UID or MAC address. You can, so it doesn't have to be that everybody connect to the wireless access point with SSID, right? For example, in the hospital where the nurses and the doctors are at, right? We want wireless access, but we don't want that to be public, right? By regulation, it needs to be protected. So you don't beacon SSID in that section of the network. And then we can control all their mobile devices. They can still connect, and we can, filter and add their individual devices by MAC address or UID if they have like Apple devices. Okay, so you just have to add it once. They don't have to re-add it every time they connect, right? And then you can enable MAC filter. Hello. So here's antenna placement. So antenna, usually a single direction antenna, it's going to be for that direction. That's like the old school. If you ever drive by people's house, you see the wire sticks on top, right? Those are the Yagi antenna that they use for TV. But antenna is pretty much a lot of the time it aims at a certain direction to pick up the waves. Now the omnidirectional antenna, which comes with all the wireless routers, right? It receives signal from all directions. So you want omnidirectional antenna. But the more powerful your antenna is, the better the signal is going to get received. So whenever that you get like a system, a wireless system, always look at like what type of antenna it has and how good is its antenna. Okay. Now, power can sometimes be reduced and restrict access in some certain area by increasing your range of IP. But things bounce signal. What bounces signal? What do you think bounces signal? I don't have to attack you logically. I can attack you physically, right? What bounces signal? So you guys, I think signal jammer is starting to become kind of popular again, right? Because you would hear it, it would go away. And then now, like a lot of the people are building out like Bluetooth and wireless signal jammer. So I can disrupt your signal by generating signal, right? That's a signal jammer. Because, you ever hear that, there's several attacks that where someone sits nearby a stoplight and then they would create signal reader and it would read how the light patterns, and because the light uses sensor, right? When you stop at the light, there's a sensor that generates signal. So it sends like how many cars and how long is the car stopped there. So it activates the light. Most lights, some of the older lights doesn't do that. It's on time, right? So what they would do is they would read the signal that's generated from that sensor, pick up that signal, and then eventually, understand the signal, and then they create a way to generate that signal, right? So a lot of it is just that. So signal jammer is a way that they can jam a signal by generating opposite or different signal. Okay. So a way that you can bounce signal is there are a few things. Water bounces signal, glass bounce signal, dense metal will bounce signal. So in the case when you install wireless in an older historical building, you would see that like they have metal plate walls and things that would prevent signal from going further. You're gonna get bounce signal. So in your house, you're gonna see some part that's like that, right? Just that dead spot in your house, that doesn't matter what wireless device you use, what amplifier you use, you don't pick up signal. So because your signal bounce there, right? So, but in security, we look at that. So what can we do to not get people to read the signal is we can install things like glass walls, right? Fountains, you know, you ever go into certain building, it's not just feng shui, right? It's actually a way to really protect certain signals. So they would place certain things in certain part of the building just to bounce off things. And that's common, right? Brick walls in certain area. Okay. So important things that you want throughput. Okay, some of you are in my networking class. You already seen this already. So when you place it like this, right, your dead spots are at the edge right here. Okay. So if I'm standing here in the corridor, right, I'm not getting strong signal on the pink or the green. It's the dead spot is at the edge right here. So you need to overlap a little bit more, close to like 35%, as you can see here. So the placement of this in the corridor is not ideal, okay? So you would place your APs in that it would overlap signal, okay? You can get signal reader, they sell them, but you know, you can also use smart devices to just to send signal. How many bars is when you get to the edge right here? Okay, so we want to have it overlap like that. Okay, any question? Okay, so we talked about the bans for 9 and 6. What should be done to prevent wireless sniffing? Right, we can, like I mentioned before, we can change the SSID settings to not, we can disable the beaconing of SSID. You can hide it. You should change the default password for your access point out of the box. So the whole goal in that is to not let them connect, right? Do you ever try to connect to a certain wireless network and you see FBI van? Don't connect to those. Either people are playing a joke or usually those are fake ones. Right? Yeah, people just name their SSID to whatever, but you know, public Wi-Fi is very dangerous. Okay, like Walmart, McDonald's, Starbucks. I think some coffee places now you have to pay in order to use their wireless, right? Or even hotels now, like you have to put in your room number and your customer information. It's just they're controlling it a little better. But at the airport, on the bus, things like that, just gotta be careful because you don't know who's on there and they could be scanning you, right? So yeah, I know a lot of security professionals, they love scanning airports and public places. So and packet stuffing is not difficult. So you just gotta be cautious. Okay. And even if you use VPN sometime, right? So I told you guys the story, right? In order to connect to my web VPN, I have to connect to a wireless network. And before I could connect to my VPN, and I have VPN software on my computer, right? When I was connecting to the Wi-Fi in certain hotel in Asia, like 2-3 entity was scanning my ports. And it says it on my software. It says so-and-so was scanning 192.168.0. You already know that that's a local wireless IP. So, And I could find like who is doing that to me, right? So I started turning off my ports and I had to disconnect because I don't want people to see what's on what I'm transmitting. So Bluetooth is the same thing, right? Your system is always looking for another system, so it's really easy to scan someone and find their traffic. Okay. All right, so we talked about antenna. It should be overlapping signals, the mobile devices that use, so that way you don't have a gap in signal. The difference between your WPA2 and the WPA, this is what we're currently using from 802.11n, right? And now it's still integrated with the AC. So WPA is very easy to crack, right? WPA2, crackable, just needs time and resource, but it is stronger. Okay, so you're buying a little bit more time by using WPA2. So this is what we're currently using. Okay. So a little bit. So there's your WPA. So make sure we know what it stands for. Wi-Fi protected access. You guys know what Wi-Fi stands for? Wireless fidelity. Yes. Okay. Yeah, so WPA and then your WEP, no, right? We don't use this. We don't use it since, you know, maybe 2 standards, 3 standards back. So don't use WEP, even though there's a feature for it. This is what we're currently using. It's wireless protected access 2, and it's a permanent replacement of WPA. So wireless can be certified. All that is you would see this on the logo of the box or the device. It's just they pay for the certification testing. Not all companies have this. It's just, you know, give them a little bit better reputation. And it uses cyber blockchaining message authentication code protocol, your CCMP, for the counter mode. When you look at your wireless today, look at the options, right? And you can go home and you can check. So TKIP, temporary key integrity protocol, this is older encryption. It is breakable. Okay. So at home, likely that most of us choose one of the other options if you have a newer router, or most of your wireless devices use AES. This should be used. It's used in your smart devices. It's used for wireless. It is harder to break. Okay. And then we might have the pre-shared key for our enterprise mode. So enterprise mode requires that the user authenticate individually, right? Like a room number and then a passcode. A pre-shared key is just a key that is a passphrase that you use. Like you would say, oh, you can connect to my wireless network using this phrase, like password. Okay. Any question? So let me move some of these to the lower. I know some of you might still be recording your answer. So in the next part, it goes over the authentication protocols. So for 11, we already mentioned that WPA is accessible to attack, and WPA2 is less susceptible to attack. So I think I'm going to change it up this semester. I might not use Kane to do brute force on the OS, but we might do something in that area, but we would do some form of password attack so you can see. Okay. So for PEAP, this type of protocol, it protects the channel, it encapsulates and encrypts EAP, so it creates a tunnel for communication for TLS. That means that it requires some type of certificate, okay? Certificates are just files that the system would reference to check based on allowance, right? Or some kind of authorization from a certain connectivity or system. You use certificate all the time, right? Whenever you say allow camera to, you know, take picture or allow microphone for this app, yeah, that's a feature on the certificate that's asking you. So when you use a certificate, you have to have a certificate issued by a certain system. And that certificate would be stored on the system that's authenticating or communicating for authentication. So PEAP uses Microsoft Handshake Authentication Protocol version 2. The older version is susceptible to attack. So we want to use a later version. This is called MS Chat v2. So when it authenticates, there's agreement, right? There's handshake process with the system so that way it can safely or create trust for exchange. Okay, I'm going to switch back to notes real quick, and then we'll come back. And you can find protected EAP on page 7 of our notes. So the EAP by itself is extensible authentication protocol. This is basically just for authentication methods, like how we can validate that that system is, or that user or that system is who it is. And then the flexible authentication via secure tunneling, it's called EAP FAST or FAST. This is Cisco based, and it also uses certificates. So whenever that you see security with tunneling, that means that it has encapsulation, and with that, it needs to have a certificate. And then there are other types. So we need to remember these in case you have questions on certifications. They do like asking about acronyms and protocols. So EAP tunnel TLS, specifically for TLS. So what does tunnel really mean, right? It just creates a secure channel where things are exchanged, okay? With that, you know, it has to have some kind of header to let the other system know that this is the, you know, the encapsulation that it's going to use. So what you would have is you would have specific type of tunnel for certain type of protocol. So TLS, as we mentioned, that TLS and SSL, these are often used for web-based security, like your HTTPS. So in that case, when you are authenticating to secure website, like when you're logging into Canvas, or when you're going to, you know, fill out your financial aid, right? Likely that you have used EAP to TLS or some form of secure base for tunneling, okay? They would integrate that, okay? And even with SSL, you also have certificate base too. Now, Radius Federation, this is a way that we can integrate multiple things to share identity. For example, right, I can log into the desktop, and then my smartphone would also have the same profile, so that way it would sync data. And you see a lot of this here. This is used for single sign-on. Okay, so you would have multiple devices using that same profile for like a certain app, like Outlook, for example.
They sometimes would use captive portals. This is a way that would require the user to log into a website or a portal and then be able to connect to a certain system at work or access a certain drive or files. University, they love doing this. They would have captive portals, or sometime your company would also do that. Okay. So in order to access, right, your system and software on your system, you have to authenticate through a website. And then with that, it would check who you are and then allow you to have access. Okay. Hotels, I've seen hotels done that too. So captive portals is a technical solution that forces the client to use web browser to complete specific process in order to access the network. And you saw some of this too here, right? When you click on wireless connection to RCCD, it tells you to open up the browser and you have to accept the term of use, right? And you can't have wireless access until you do that. So in that sense, you also, they integrated captive portals here for the wireless. We're almost done, just a few more. Our lab seems a little longer, but it's not too bad. Any question? So as you can see, there are many different type of solutions for different technologies, right? But we always want to overlap our solutions for security. So on the next part of your notes, it goes over attacks. So disassociation attack, right? Like if I'm using a Wi-Fi pineapple to make myself, make that system to look like your wireless router, then I would then perform this association attack, meaning that I just kick people off of the network, right? The ones that are connected to me, I don't like them, so I just disassociate with them. So simply removing client, and literally on the appliance, it has a button that you can click, right? You can remove one by one, okay? So simply, you just take back the connection by removing their IP addresses, right? There are many different ways to do it, but that's the easiest way because in order to get internet access, they have to be part of the network. So don't let them be part of the network. So that's a disassociation attack. Okay. So they would use the frame and then the spoof the victim MAC address, so the physical address of that system, and then be able to take them off the network. So it shuts the connection for the victim. And so you can do Wi-Fi protected setup, configure wireless devices without typing the passphrase. But in this case, right, when you turn on the WPS, there's a button on your wireless router for that. Most of them come with it. If you do that, that just basically opens it so they don't need to put in any kind of passcode or passphrase. So they just need a PIN, like an 8-digit PIN. Okay, so with that, just discover the PIN. It enumerates and look for the PIN, actually. So Wi-Fi Pineapple is a rogue AP, so I can make myself a rogue AP, place it into the network, and then just kind of open it up and see who connects. And then the evil twin is the identical rogue IP. It has the same information as the legitimate one. A rogue IP could be a different name, but the evil twin has to be identical. And I talked about jamming attack, just generating different radio signal, and then initiation vector attack. And this is just basically discovering the pre-share key. You can do this through Wireshark, by the way. You can scan the wireless part, and then you can inspect the IV number, and that IV number can be correlated to a certain pre-share key. So as long as you can capture the information, so you can use it for packet injection, and then reuse that packet to mask yourself as that identity with that IV number. If you use tap to pay, you use NFC, right? NFC can be used for a lot of things like remote control, near field connection, or communication. These are the standards, but the attacker can read the signal and capture the data, and it would listen in for NFC. And the NFC is been around for a long time. They can also use antenna to boost the range and intercept and transfer from the device, or they can install a Trojan to capture the payment information. This is used very popular with the new chip on your credit card. Okay. And then your Bluetooth, there are several types, but I just put the three common one that you see. You got blue jacking. Basically just send nearby devices with unwanted message. Blue snarfing is they would use it to access email and contact information. And blue jugging is to gain access device to the backdoor and put the backdoor on the system. Right? And then the replay attack. So there are a lot more to the notes than just the ones that are listed, but RFID attack, radio frequency identification attack, they just need to collect data by listening in. And a lot of the times, most of the wireless attack comes down to disruption or interception. Okay. There you go. So the common ones you see, IV attacks, evil twin, and NFC, jamming. I think Bluetooth becomes more popular now, but they re-standardize Bluetooth pretty regularly. So for the pen tester, they would use like Air Tracking G. There are many, right, to perform. Even Kane and Able has that capability to do some wireless attack. Because ultimately, so a lot of these tools, number one things is it's gonna try to crack the encryption to that device, right? So if I could get into the controller of the wireless network, then open sesame, right? I can kick people off this association attack. I can, navigate around the network and install things on the network and access the system. So you just gotta get into a certain part of the network and see what's there. So that's what you see. And then as we talked about VPNs earlier, right? There are VPNs that you can acquire. You can pay a certain amount of money. There's software VPN. There's VPN that you would connect to a site. And then basically, instead of, your traffic is being forwarded and sent by different systems. And the traffic won't be too revealed, right, to a certain scanner or someone who's looking. So VPNs are also, virtual private network is often used also for remote workers and things like that. So normally you would see RRAS, remote access type of servers. We would integrate VPN connection for it. And often it would use IPsec. But if you're using a web-based VPN, right? Like you would pay $9.99 a year and you would go to the website, log in to have that service. So the web-based service is through port 443, which is HTTPS. And then you would also see direct VPN. So let's take a look at those. So today you're gonna see a little bit more on Secure Shell. As I mentioned before, Secure Shell is a way that we can securely connect from a device to a device. So we can do that. We can use Windows-based remote desktop protocol. This is generally weak in security. We use this for testing and temporary. You don't leave this on. But we can use it to remote connect. So you would have a VPN on a server, and then you would control that using a console. You need to configure routing and remote access. So we would need to be able to set up our switches and routers to understand that, so it would forward the right traffic. You would have a VPN concentrator, and the concentrator, its job is to be used, so it would establish the service and for authentication and encryption purposes. So if you use in the public area, you need to have these two, okay? For most enterprises, they would use IPsec or IPsec. This creates the tunnel to encrypt your information that's being sent. Okay. So it uses encapsulated security payload. Now, TLS, as I mentioned before, this is used for web or HTTPS, and it uses OpenVPN or an Open Connect. And then there are different types of tunneling where you can configure. So, and then sometime we would do a site-to-site VPN. So we would need to set up at least, one server talking to another server. And that's how we can connect the two networks together. And then we have always on VPN. This is used for remote access or site-to-site. So those are some of the common ones that you see or the type. Any questions? Okay. Then on the next part, your NAC or your network access control. This is to use to monitor and inspect. And we can make sure, if it is the system, make sure that we patch it and update it. You can also use this for VPN redirection before your firewall and your server. Okay, you can also have it as an agent where it is a tool that they can download. So the client system, so if I'm working from home, I can download it and install on my system so I can authenticate and connect to the VPN. And sometime when you have a VPN service, you're required to do that. Okay, any questions? So this password authentication protocol, this is older. It sends password in clear text. This is what you see in the 80s. And then chat came along and Microsoft integrated MS Chat. It is a way that the system would, like the host and the client would communicate before authenticate, and it would establish trusted connection. So the challenge handshake. And then now you would see Terminal Access Controller Access System Plus. This is alternative to Cisco and Radius. Okay. But Microsoft had improved their MS Chat to MS Chat later version. So you want to use the later version. Okay, so let's talk about 17 and 18. So on your computer, you need to connect to the wireless network. So make sure that you're connecting to your RCCD for this part to work. So I want to show you a few commands that you can use instead of using, the click buttons, because sometimes we don't have access to the graphical user interface. So it tells you to go to settings, network and internet, and then you just got to choose your Wi-Fi, or if you're on your Wi-Fi on your taskbar, you can, if it's enabled, you can just connect to the network. I think some of you are already on wireless. So I'm going to do that on the computer here on my laptop. So it might look a little different. So once you had connected to the wireless network, you're going to open up command prompt. And then you are going to use the command that is shown here. So you're going to do a net sh, WLAN for wireless LAN, and then show profiles. And you might not have as many profiles as mine because, every system interface is a little different depending on the connection that that system has established. So this is a good way to find like which wireless network that was previously connected to that system, okay, by using this command. So the profiles is the stored information from the wireless network that the system previously connected to. So when you see that, if the system only connected to RCCD, it only shows that one profile. Yeah. Yeah, you connected to that already, right? Okay. Now, what's the next step?
Search CID, but where?
Yeah. Like CMD in the search bar, and then open up your command prompt. Any questions? Okay. So you might have only one profile listed. And then so on the next one, we're going to do a show settings. So instead of profiles, we mentioned that profiles are just the wireless network that the system previously connected to. We can do a show settings. And basically, this gives you the summarized settings of what is checked when it is connecting, right? So show block networks invisible for the network list, for the profile configured networks. Can the user share credential for authentication? Yes or no, right? So you can look at those settings. Any questions? Yes. That's correct. So as we do step G for number 17, look at the settings and answer the questions, right? And then share credential. Those are some of the things that you can check. And then on the next part, you're going to do a show tracing. So we can do an up arrow key and then change the last option to tracing. And if there's tracing in progress, it would show you, right? But since there's no one tracing the system, it would say no tracing is in progress. Okay. And then if you want all the information about your wireless, we would do a show all. So instead of tracing, we can do a show all. And it's going to give a lot of information from profile to capabilities. You're going to see a lot of capabilities like the standards, the addresses, the encryption, right? We learned about CCMP right there for each of the profile information. So this tool, using NetSH is not just about like troubleshooting or looking at information, right? You can use this for doing forensic. You can also find, you know, if you're doing ethical hacking, you can use it to look at system details, information, and so on. Okay, so that's just a little bit of practice with the command netsh WLAN for wireless. We can take a screen capture for step I once you do a show all. I don't need a bunch of screen capture, right? You can take the last part where it shows the capabilities or whichever part that you deem that you wanted to look at it again, because your assignments are going to be for your usage. Okay, next we're going to use Talos Intelligence to look at real-time threat data coming from emails and web for a certain domain, which is Microsoft.com. We're going to be our domain that we're going to use today. So you can control and click the link or copy and paste it. Oh, I'm hitting shift, sorry. And it's going to take you to Talos Intelligence website here. You just put in your domain name. So we're going to do Microsoft.com. And it's going to give you additional information about this, right? Reputation. So we saw that it is trusted, rated. It's not on the block list. So if you're not sure which site is a water hole, you guys know what water hole. I think I explained that before, maybe not this class. Those are websites that have malicious files or things that could be harmful to the visitor to the site. So you can use that domain and put it in here. Suspicious domain you can check. So Talos is its own entity, and basically it goes through and it has a way to check your domain content and things like that and threats on the domain. Okay, so as you look down on the next part right here, it tells you what is the reputation of the domain. We already saw that. Look at the upper right-hand side. If there's a score, yeah, they changed this, but it's possible that we're not seeing everything. Okay. Yeah, that's the email. So for the reputation score for the email volume, let me see if you can find that information. Yeah, they don't list that anymore, right?
For ours, it does.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not seeing on the wireless side because, yeah, I'm getting filter content. That's okay. Yeah, if you see that put down, I think I checked yesterday, it's like 7.4, 7.5. And then, so how many IP addresses are used to send email in Microsoft.com domain? So you can list that. So you will likely see more information than I do.
Yeah, visit the site and type in the Microsoft.com in the bar, the search bar
Of the site. Okay, so for the next part, after you record all your answers, you're going to click on the Who Is tab. And then it's going to give you information about the server. So Who is a service that would associate the registered information to the domain name system. Okay. Sometimes they would hide that information, but you can look at some of the information on there. You notice that like they use markmonitor.com. So this is not, you know, this is their registrar URL, but they have a service that blocks some information. But down here, you would see some server information. And then you would see whether there's DNSSEC or not. Okay. So that would show you how you can use real-time threat data on tablets. Any question? Need any help? Okay. So make sure we read through the notes. Make sure that we go through our assignments again. I'm gonna stop recording.